School Nutrition Training Part 2, Meal Plan, Meal Counting for TAs and other staff assisting with distribution and meal counts. School Reopening Meal Service Style Plan B. Meal service plan for students on campus will either be meal service from the serving line, classroom delivery, or kiosk in the hallway, curbside on Wednesday, meals to go on Fridays. Each school has their own unique meal service plan specific to their school. Meal service plan for meals for home consumption includes meals passed out at the end of the day from designated locations at each school. Classroom meal delivery. The meal delivery cart, kiosk, flex cart, utility cart will go to the classroom door. The teacher will have the student to sanitize their hands. The student will come to the door one at a time. The student will say their name. The person accounting for the meal will check the student's name off on the roster and then hand the student their meal. The student will return to their desk or assigned location to eat. TAs or other school helpers or school nutrition staff may, for pre-K, special needs classes, or others as indicated on the meal plan, disperse the meals to the students in the classroom. Each student should sanitize their hands before they are handed their meal. The TA, other school helper, or school nutrition staff will then account for the meal by checking off the student name on the roster. The student should tell you their name, then check their name off on the roster or cartwheel or register, ensuring they have all items. For summer feeding, all items must be taken. Meals will be delivered to some EC, pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade classes. Meals being delivered to classrooms may be delivered by school nutrition staff or TAs and other school staff who are trained to help with disbursement of the meals. If TAs are delivering or picking up meals for classrooms, then plastic containers can be used to pack each class's meal. CamGo coolers are needed for milk distribution for classes. Any staff, including TAs, must wear a mask and gloves when dispersing meal items. Change your gloves when you move to different stations and clean equipment between different stations. Kiosk meal service. Kiosk is equipment used at your school to create a kiosk. Could either be a rolling sheet pan rack, utility cart, or breakfast cart to pass out the meals. Coolers, CamGo boxes, or milk merchandisers for milk distribution. Staff is to wear the mask and gloves, must have all items pre-packaged. A la carte behind the line and passed out by server will not start until the third week of school, August 31st. Students will get hand sanitizers from the dispenser near the line before their turn to pick up their meal. 6-foot floor identifier should be in place. School nutrition service must hand the students all items from the kiosk during meal service. Students cannot touch items on the kiosks. Water must be available on all kiosks during lunch service. T-urns for dispersing water can go on the serving area or another table or cart in the hallway. It must be dispersed by the assigned adult with mask and gloves. School nutrition staff must change out gloves when moving to the next station or hallway. That comes through the kiosk. When restocking food items, when completing the point of sale or roster. Any staff, including TAs, must wear their mask and gloves when dispersing meal items. Change your gloves when you move to the different stations and clean equipment between different stations. Students will give their name or number to the cashier. Their name will then be checked off on the roster or entered into the point of service. Serving line meal service. All food items must be handed directly to the students and other customers. Students cannot grab items off of the line, including milk. Milk must be handed to each student if they choose to get a milk with their meal. Students should use hand sanitizers at the front of the line before being handed their meal. Students will say their name and it will be checked off on the roster or entered in the point of service. School nutrition workers must change out their gloves when preparing food items, when restocking the serving line, when serving food items to students, and when cleaning and disinfecting the serving line. The Summer Feeding Program and National School Lunch Program. Summer Feeding Program is from August 17th through the 31st. All schools will be participating in the Summer Feeding Program. Meals will be at no cost to students. The Summer Feeding Program will end on Monday, August 31st. No offer versus serve is allowed. Students are given all the items, no turning down of items unless we have a unique meal need, paperwork for them to be able to decline certain items. Under National School Lunch Program, this is starting September the 1st. All schools will be participating in National School Lunch. Breakfast and lunch will be charged according to the student's meal status. New for the 2021 school year, students with the reduced meal status will eat lunch at no cost. Offer versus serve is allowed, however, they must take the bag to be considered a complete meal. Meal counting. A reimbursable meal must be counted at each point of service terminal, whether it's on a computer, cartwheel, or paper tally sheet. Meal count form must reflect meals as meals are served. Summer feeding and National School Breakfast and National School Lunch, the student must be identified by using an alpha roster by classroom or an alpha roster for the school at breakfast time, or enter the student in the cash register point of service. The student will say their name and then be checked on the roster when they receive their meal keyed in the point of service cash register. The person accounting for the meals on the roster will sign and date the roster and return it to the cafeteria manager. The manager will enter the data in the quick lunch program. Summer feeding cash handling procedures. An emergency roster by classroom will be at the point of service terminals and at classrooms, so the person serving as cashier can check off each student that receives a meal if a point of service device is not available. That roster is to be signed by the cashier or designee, non-meal server, then given to the school nutrition manager or designated school nutrition person to be entered into a device such as Cartwheel or Quick Lunch for meal counting. National School Breakfast, National School Lunch, cash handling procedures. National School Breakfast and National School Lunch students actually received a meal must be identified by their name. Ideally, a register as point of service will be used. Optional accounting of meals served will be by an alpha emergency roster by classroom. The person serving as a cashier can check off each student by their name to indicate that the student receives a meal if a point of service device is not available. That roster is to be signed by the cashier or designee, non-meal server, then given to the school nutrition manager or designated school nutrition person to be entered into a device for meal claiming. Friday curbside to-go meal procedures. National School Breakfast, National School Lunch students actually receiving a meal must be identified by their name. Ideally, a register as point of service will be used. Optional accounting of meals served will be by the Alpha Emergency roster by classroom or by Alpha School roster, depending on how students will be released on Fridays. The person serving as a cashier can check off each student by their name to indicate that the student receives a meal if a point of service device is not available. That roster is to be signed by the cashier or designee, a non-meal server, then given to the school nutrition manager or designated school nutrition person to be entered into a device for meal claiming. Each meal the student receives, optional that they do not take any meals, but for each meal they take, a roster must be completed for each meal and the name marked off. All items for summer feeding must be taken, but for National School Lunch and National School Breakfast, they may elect certain foods not to take. Friday to-go meal counting. The server and cashier must ensure that a reimbursable meal has been served and counted at each point of service terminal, whether on a computer, a cartwheel, or a paper tally sheet, which will be a school roster. Meal count form must reflect meals as meals are served, a form for each meal provided on Friday. Summer feeding and National School Lunch and National School Breakfast, the student must be identified by using an alpha roster or cash register point of service. The student will say their name and be checked off on the roster when they receive the meal. Each meal received must be accounted for on separate rosters. Wednesday curbside for virtual students, curbside to-go meal procedures. Wednesday students may come from other schools or from their base school to pick up meals. Summer feeding and National School Breakfast, National School Lunch students actually receive a meal must be identified by their name. Ideally, a register as a point of service will be used. If students are enrolled at the base school, an alpha roster can be used to mark off their name for each day they're picking up meals if a point of service is not available. If the student is from another school, identify the school that they are enrolled in Pitt County and enter them in the point of service. The person serving as a cashier can check off each student at the base school by their name or write in the name of the school and student if they're not from their base school to indicate the student receives a meal if a point of service, meaning a cash register device, is not available. That roster is to be signed by the cashier or designee, non-meal server, then given to the school nutrition manager or designated school nutrition person to be entered into a device such as Quick Lunch for meal claiming. Each meal the student receives, optional, they do not have to take any meals, but for each meal they take, a roster must be completed for each meal and the name marked off all items for summer feeding must be taken, but for National School Lunch and National School Breakfast, they may elect certain items not to take. Rosters should be signed and dated. Ideally, the student will say the name and be entered in the point of service cash register. Wednesday curbside for virtual students meal count, and the server and cashier must ensure that a reimbursable meal has been served and counted at each point of service terminal, whether on a computer, cartwheel, or paper tally sheet. Meal rosters or point of service must reflect the meals as the meals are being served. A form for each meal provided on Wednesday should be completed, or the student should be entered in the point of service. Rosters must be filled out completely, have a signature of the person accounting for the meals before being turned into the cafeteria. Summer feeding and National School Breakfast and National School Lunch, the student must be identified by using an alpha roster or cash register point of service. Overview. Due to COVID-19, students are not allowed to pick up anything. Employees are required to hand each student their meal and milk and disperse water in provided cup if the water is requested at lunch service. To dispense water, you should pick the cup up from the sides or bottom, never touch the rim. Pour from a pitcher or maneuver the spout to release the water. Finally, cover with the lid before passing the water to the student. We will be following the school food service meal pattern, so offer versus serve will not be used at the beginning. Students can't refuse an item provided, and that means no offer versus serve. Students are given adequate components to equal a reimbursable meal at breakfast and lunch. School personnel or TAs will be accounting for meals served using a roster. That will be the point of service. Point of service is the final determination whether a meal is reimbursable. Only mark meals that are complete. Has all the components for summer feeding through August 31st. Point of service can be in the cafeteria or at another location in the school. Cashiers control the flow of the line in order to monitor allergens, charges, and the meal pattern. Cashiers control the flow of the line in order to monitor allergens. The bags may be labeled with the student names if they require a special meal, monitor charges, and monitor each student took all the required components to qualify for meeting the meal pattern. Meals served without meeting the required meal pattern at breakfast or lunch could require funds to be reclaimed by the federal and state. Please be accurate with the information recorded. Component versus item. Food component is one of 5 food groups that are part of the USDA reimbursable meal pattern. Food item is a specific food offered within the 5 food components, such as baked chicken and applesauce, etc. Thank you for stepping up to help us provide meals to the students in your school. You can always ask your school nutrition manager or assistant manager any questions about your assignments.